This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. Yes, life is a maze, and we're all going through it. Some of us pretend that it's perfect. We know exactly where all the turns are. And when we bump into a wall, we will always say that we planned it that way. That was not an accident. But the reality of it is nobody's perfect, and you can plan all you want, but there will be challenges and obstacles that can create great opportunities. And Brenden, I'm not going to even attempt to say your last name. So I'm introducing Brenden, and Brenden, tell us what your last name is.
It's Kumar Savik.
Okay. I can mess up any name. You give me the name Smith and I'll mess that up as well. So I'm very active on podmatch. And what I love about podmatch for our listeners to know is that podmatch is made up of podcasters like Brenden and myself, influencers who want to guest on our shows. And it's amazing. It's almost like playing a dating game, just so to speak. Because I've had some people who have responded and said, yes, I'd like to be on your podcast. And there's like no connection. But yet when I have them on, I find out, wow, yeah, there really is a connection. So sometimes you can't just see it in that little blurb that we put out as our bio. So what made you, Brenden, decide that I can be this coach, guide, speaker to help other people through their day?
Yeah, absolutely, Karen. It's a fantastic way of starting the conversation. So when I was in university / college, I went to business school, and I did these things called case competitions. Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age were playing rugby or football or some other cool sport, you probably wouldn't see me playing. I did professional sports for nerds, which was presentations. And that's what I did competitively. That's how I learned how to speak. And then as I got older, I started coaching students who were younger than me, mostly for free, to help them do better at these competitions too. So I accidentally, big word on accident here, Karen, accidentally developed a skill on how to teach other people communication. And that's what later led to the YouTube channel MasterTalk, because I realized that everything that I was sharing to the students wasn't available online for free on the internet. And that's how it started. And then it later turned into a coaching business.
Well, and so many of us think that we have great communication skills, when the reality of it is most people don't even understand 50% of what we're saying to them. And that doesn't mean that you're speaking over their head, but if you're not presenting it in a way that that other person is going to really comprehend, you can talk all day long and it'd be like just sitting in my studio, not even on Zoom, and just talking to the wall and the pictures on the wall. And it's interesting that I was a communications major in college, but I didn't truly develop my communication skills until after my second son was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And my voice got very loud because it was like, he's been fine for the last 6 years. Why are we putting this label on him? Okay. And once we put the label on him, everybody else labeled him and saw him in a different way. And that's when I realized I had to talk about it, because it's called the spectrum for one good reason. It's widespread. And no two of us are exactly alike, but even if you're on the spectrum, you're not alike. So I know where my communication skills have gotten better. But when you were doing all these competitions, what made you realize that maybe your skills weren't as strong as they needed to be?
Oh, very, very, and thank you so much for sharing your story about my business partner's son also has a son who is autistic, and you're so right. It's such a spectrum, and it's crazy how people label
Right.
each other. Absolutely. Yeah. So for me, to keep it quite simple, Karen, I realized I wasn't that great because I kept losing competitions, and I'm really competitive, and so I needed to win. So for me, that was a big driver for being successful, not just in life. It's just one of my ethos is always compete. So when I started losing these competitions, I said, okay, what are the best people winning? They were phenomenal speakers. Like these are the best speakers in the country that you're up against. And I realized that if I wanted to coach my own teams and beat the other teams from other schools, I needed to be the best communicator in the school or on in the country. So I kept refining my skills over and over again, made a ton of mistakes, and that's how I got to the level of communication that I have today.
So you said that you kept refining them, but were you being guided by somebody else? Were you taking classes, or you just sort of figured it out on your own?
Yeah, I did have some guidance, but never really specifically to communications. Let me add a little bit more. So let's start with the context. I'm a broke student. I'm like 20 years old. My parents worked in factories, so I didn't really have that much money. I didn't really have a network. I didn't even have money for Toastmasters, which is like $100 a year. It's like a
Right.
nonprofit community you can like join. So I didn't have any of that stuff. But what I did have was an exceptional pool of talent. So when I was getting started, when I was going up in the scene of case competition, when I was around 19 years old, I started getting help from students my own age. So they were the ones who were kind of just coaching me, where I would speak and they'd say, I don't like your suit. You should smile more. But they weren't professionals in the space. So a lot of it was a mad scientist approach where I kept making mistakes and I kept studying a bunch of speakers. But because I didn't have a guide, it took me 3 to 4 years to get really good. But I did figure it out eventually.
And, I like your honesty there, because so many people, at least in my age group, always refer to the fact, oh, I took this course online and I did this. And, I listen to Tony Robbins all the time and I watch his mannerisms. And it's like, really? I mean, let's be honest. How did you get to where you are today? And that's why I developed this particular podcast, because I'm tired of looking on social media and only seeing the inflated, perfect individuals out there. And I realize that there's a bigger world out there. Some of this we can teach ourselves, okay? Some of it we're going to need some help. And it seems like since the pandemic, there are more of us out there who are opening up. I don't even know if you want to call them new businesses, new opportunities, to not only help ourselves grow, but help others grow. And the best way to help them grow is to guide and not tell them, like, I don't like the way you're wearing that suit, or you're not smiling enough, or you're smiling too much. Because depending on the audience, you never know. Is that too big of a smile or not enough of a smile? So one of the things that I've noticed is that when I talk to people and I say that I'm a coach advocate, they look at me and go, what is all this business about coaches? When did this new profession develop? So you're a coach. Do you have any perspective on that when people ask why should I go to Brenden? What is so special about him?
There's not much special about me. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, no.
So here's what I would say, Karen. Coaching's been around for a long time. I would say as an industry, it's probably grown in the last 20, 30 years. Right. But it's been around for a long time. I mean, it started with Zig Ziglar and then it went on to Tony and I'm sure Zig Ziglar had his own coaches that we probably have never heard of. But I think the key at the end of the day is I feel the reason why coaching is such a prominent industry is because people need accountability. A lot of people do. So even if you have all the information, you know, what I always like to say in the days I follow in the industry for anything, information is always free, but implementation is the fee, in the sense that you share everything generously. And some people can figure it out on that information, like I did, for example, when I was younger. But there's other areas of my life that you give me information I can't implement. And so I have coaches on my business that I pay pretty penny for, or high performance, because those are things I don't want to figure out on my own. So it's all about figuring out what makes the most sense for you and your budget. I think for me, what's helped me stand out in the industry, the marketplace, is because I never did this for money initially. I think that's why I've been so prominent as a coach. Because remember, I'm still fairly young. So how did I climb the ladder so quickly?
Right.
And the main reason was because it was never for money. I was already making money. I was a technology consultant at IBM doing six figures at the age of like 22, 23. Right. And I was living with my mom, and I still do, by the way. So I had a ton of cash. Like, life was great. So I started MasterTalk because I felt, to your point, people didn't have access to this information for free. So I started creating videos, and that's still the mission for MasterTalk. But what happened, Karen, was because I share so generously my information, what's on a podcast and a conversation, like you could ask me anything, I'll have an answer. I'll try to, anyways. A lot of executives, for them, that specific community, people who are execs, well, for them, spending a few $1,000s on a communication coach is chump if they
Right.
get a salary increase in their job. So that community reached out to me specifically, and those people pay for access to me, or like entrepreneurs doing really well in their businesses, or podcast hosts who have already like a significant number of downloads, and they really want to be number one in their space.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the image of number one, because when we started, I should say, when I started podcasting, my son was doing an internship for his business degree um, with an internet station. And of course, they claimed here in Cleveland, and they were number one in the industry. This was 2012. And I have an IT background, so I thought, really? Well, I'm going to start researching this, and I'm not going to be afraid to research it. And they weren't even number one in Cleveland, let alone in the world. But if that made them feel good to say it, you know, how many people are going to go research it? And those who do are going to find out what I found out and say, okay, yeah, enjoy your 15 minutes of fame, so to speak. But I was watching my son, and I realized, you know, I wanted to be a broadcaster when I graduated high school. I took 2 of my 4 years and got my associate's degree. When my parents realized what I was doing, they said, no more. If you're not going for a teaching degree, we're not going to pay for this, because what female is ever going to make it in broadcasting? This was 1968, 1970, and they were sort of right. It was very limiting. And so I gave it up, but I had my associate's degree, and I tried to use it where I could. But when my son was getting ready to graduate high school, I sort of looked at him and I thought, 4 years, he's going to have more of a degree than me. I'm mom. Okay. Mom needs to have at least equivalent to what he's going to have. So I went back to school and got my degree in communications and went on for my master's. And yet the day I got it, and, you know, I sort of went to the company that he was working with, and I said, I have an idea for a show. Okay, well, listen. And I said, I just want to talk to people and share our stories. They said, oh, that'll never fly. I said, what's it going to cost you? I'm not asking you to pay me. I'm just going to come on and do it. I'm going to fill a spot. And they said, okay. And within a year, I had people begging to come on the show. Now, they were local people, but hey, I wasn't making a penny at it, but I was using my skills. And that's what was exciting me. And then 10 years ago, when I left corporate America, I said to my son, you know, we have a little bit of money. Should we invest in starting another internet station? He was all gung-ho until 6 months after we started it. He went to work for a major league sporting company. And he was not allowed to talk sports on a podcast anymore. So I reinvented what we're doing here. But the point I'm getting out to our listeners is that just like you, in the beginning, I did it to get my voice out, to share your voice. Wasn't making any money, but that was okay. And here 10 years later, I'm now in that position that I've grown. We have a good base, and you can always have a bigger base. But I don't have to be number one, except to the listeners who are getting the messages that they want. You know, I don't even know what it takes to be number one in this world. Maybe you have the answer for me.
That's a beautiful message, Karen. You know, I think it has everyone has a different definition of success.
Right.
And I think that's the beauty of the world. And I think what we need to do more of is, and that's what I think society's lacking today, is that thoughtfulness around being, how do I say this? Being open about everyone else's definition of success. You know, I think a lot of people just go, oh, like this is my definition, and then they start arguing over it. Versus me, it's just like, yeah, let's just, like, my sister's a great example of this. She doesn't want anything to do with what I'm doing. Right? She's an English teacher at a high school. Right? That's what she wants to do. Because for her, success means spending more time with family, having a balanced life, and, you know, seeing money as a vehicle to live in good life. But she doesn't want to be like a multi-gajillionaire or anything like that. And I love that. Whereas my definition of success is very different from ours, but we get along just fine. So I think the
Sure.
key is just finding that, what does number one mean for us? I think that's the question.
And, you know, and that is a great way of looking at it. I know when my middle brother, so I'm the youngest of three, my middle brother was in a 5-year architectural program. And his last semester of school, he went to Europe. And when he came back, he was supposed to sit down for his finals and then graduate. He got back, he packed up his car, drove to the West Coast, never sat for his finals, never walked across the stage, because he realized when he came back from Europe, as much as he liked architecture, he had no desire to sit at a drafting board and create blueprints or whatever else would be asked of him. And my parents were like appalled, I can imagine, you know, 5 years of putting money on an education. But my brother became successful in a different vein. He went out to the West Coast, and he ended up being a sound engineer, music producer, and he made a life for himself. And my parents didn't understand his success until maybe 10, 15 years into his career. And they realized he was doing what he loved day after day. He was putting food on his table. He could, you know, take trips if he wanted to. And his definition of success was totally different. Whereas if he had graduated architectural school, there were jobs waiting for him. Back in that day, he would have made a lot of money, but he knew he wasn't going to be happy. And that's what I love about coaching. You don't tell us if we're happy or not. You help us figure out what's important.
Well said. Well said. I love that, Karen. I completely agree.
So tell me what it's like putting together your, and it is a course, correct, that you're doing on YouTube? Because that's the way I looked at it.
So on YouTube, the mission is, think of it like an encyclopedia for everything related to communication and public speaking. So when somebody goes on MasterTalk, Karen, they have an answer to everything they could ever ask on communication. That's the goal.
Okay.
So if somebody goes, I'm an introvert. Like, how do I communicate better? They just type the free video is just there, and then they just listen to it. And that's what MasterTalk is. And then outside of that, it's a coaching business for some people.
So give us an idea. If I came to you and said, okay, I've been doing this for 10 years. I really need it to grow, because if I don't start bringing in money, I'm just gonna have to close down. So I listened to, your different YouTubes, and I'm getting all excited, which typically that's what it does to me. It gets me like, wow, I want to be that person. And before I realize that I'm coming to you and I want to be 20 different people. How do you help me decipher? Because if I'm trying to do too many, juggle too many balls at once, I'm not going to be successful. But I'm used to being that hamster in the cage. So how do you guide me out of that?
I have a couple of strategies, a little bit of tough love, but not for you, but just people in general.
Sure.
I just ask a simple question, Karen. And the question is simply this: if you could only accomplish 3 things before you die, what would you want those 3 things to be and why? And what this does is it creates a lot of clarity, because a lot of people, let's say, they have 20 things, but I go, well, if you can only do 3 things and then you're dead, what would you do? And then they go, oh, and then it kind of like shocks them. They go, well, I would do this, this, and this. I was like, why did you pick those 3 over the other 17 you got on the list? They'd say, because this is a must, because I'm the only human being who can do this, blah, 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 blah. And then you get there. And then when we get to that place, then we ask ourselves the next question, which is, how does communication feed into those 3 things? How does communication amplify those 3 things that you want to accomplish in life? And then the last piece is really figuring out if it makes sense for you to hire a coach to achieve that, or is it easier for you to just do it on your own? If you're just getting started, you don't have a budget for something. So that would be the 3-pronged approach.
So for instance, as I'm listening to this, I probably wouldn't have 20 things. I probably would have 1 million on my list. But I have learned over probably the last 10 years, the things that are really important to me. Sometimes I can't verbalize them. And when I get to that point, I know that I'm listening to too many voices in my head and I have to take a step back. And whether it's do yoga or meditate or whatever, I just know that I've got to get away from, all the sensory. Because as a female growing up in the 60s and 70s, the message I got was you have to please everybody and you have to be able to do everything for everybody. And as I've shared in many of my podcasts, I did that the majority of my life. And I kept waiting for, to be struck over the head and say, wow, you made it. And what I was finding was I was getting hit on the head saying, you're not going to make it this way. You're so busy helping everybody else make it. And you think you're rejoicing in their excitement, but you're not. In fact, you're feeling envious. And when that hit me, that's when I realized, you know what? It's time to do something for me. It doesn't mean that I can't please others, but I have to start with me first. And that's why when I started the podcasting, I realized if I was doing it for the love of the dollar, I'm not going to be pleasing myself. When those dollars start to flow in, if they do, that'll be an added bonus. Now, for you, I'm sure it had to be, even though you said you weren't making money in the beginning, you were making money someplace else that allowed to sustain you. So how do you tell individuals who say, I'll never be able to do what I want to do because I have to work this job to put food on my table?
Yeah, here's what I would say, Karen. My perspective is always this, because when I quit my job, I was the only breadwinner in my family, right? So I took a lot of risk, and thankfully for me, it paid off. I always like to say, it's a quote that my coach gave me, one of my mentors, Beryl Solomon. He says this: there's 2 types of people in the world. Because the first type of person is always going to make an excuse not to do something. And the second type of person in the world is always going to make an excuse to do something. So the question we all need to ask ourselves is, are we making an excuse to do the thing or not do the thing? So in my case, I was working 65, 70 hours a week at IBM. Like it was a lot of work. That's why I got paid good money to do it. So a lot of people in my place would say like, okay, like I shouldn't be starting a YouTube channel. I should just work here and focus. Whereas me, it's like, no, I want to do something really important with my life. So what's it going to cost me? And the cost was simple. I have to spend weekends working on MasterTalk because there's no other hours in the day. So some people will do whatever it takes to make something work, and other people will find one little reason why they shouldn't. So there's not really advice. I think it's really about, because I don't like to judge people either. It's all about, what do you choose to prioritize? And a lot of people, especially when they start making money, they tend to prioritize luxury goods, maybe a Louis Vuitton purse, maybe getting their nails done, maybe buying this fancy car, right? Whereas me, my priority was, I wanted to do something important with my time. So because of that, I made a lot of decisions that most people my age who were doing six figures anyways in corporate just wouldn't make. I still lived in my mother's basement. I still do today, even with the success I have today. I invested 25% of my personal income into a production team to do my YouTube channels professionally. I bought a used car, nice Toyota. It was like 5-10K cash, right? I don't have like a BMW or anything. So I practiced very low living style. So I would have a lot more cash in the bank to make MasterTalk successful. So I think it always goes back to, what is our priority and how are we optimizing for that priority?
And isn't it also not answering to people around us who question, um, well, if you're doing so well, Brenden, why don't you have your own condo? If you're doing so well, Brenden, uh, why don't you have a Porsche? I mean, these are things that I've seen through the years. People make assumptions about us. And that part has frustrated me. And that's why when I started these podcasts, I wanted individuals to come on honestly. And I am so lucky that I've only, out of 130 podcasts now, I think I have one that I'm really not pleased with, but I keep it out there because that person believed that success is only based on how you dress, what car you drive, how much money you have in the bank, how many trips you take. And to this day, I keep getting questions from that person saying, so have you made it yet? And my answer is yes. I have, in 1 year, been able to talk to people like yourself, learn so much from you, and then allow you to share that message with listeners who may be sitting at home, like you said, and God, these are the things I want to do. But right now, I don't have the money to pay a coach. So, what can I do until I can get to that point that I can find the right coach? And yes, it's going to be worth every penny. But right now, as you said, you have to make the decision to take that step. And you're going to be afraid. And I'm sure you were afraid when you were doing it as well, that, gosh, I'm so used to this paycheck. You were used to that, pace at IBM, that what if I give it all up and it doesn't get to where I want it to be? Oh, wait a second. I'm not going to think negative. I'm going to think positive. I'm going to make it happen.
Absolutely. So a couple of thoughts. There's a couple of questions. Just let's tackle each one. So the first one was really around the point that you made, rightfully so, by the way, around people who judge you and who create perceptions of, oh, like, why don't you have this car? Why don't you have this? And this is a part, the dark side of success, to your point, and the intention of your show that a lot of people don't really talk about, Karen, which is, if you want to be successful by your own definition, so that could be being richer, that could be having better relationships with kids, whatever that definition is, that implies that you're going to achieve something that most people don't have, which also implies that you need to get rid of most people. So if you want to be successful, you need to be willing. I call this rule 95-5, is you need to delete 95% of people around you if you want to get to that 5% success that you're looking for, however you define it. So like, for example, when you're talking about that, about the Brenden, what at the condo, in my head, I was like, oh, what is she talking about? And the reason I said that, kind of had to snap myself in, because I don't have anyone in my network saying that about me, because I already deleted all of those people so long ago. So that's the first piece I would say around success, is we need to be willing to get rid of those people. And in lieu, and we need to prioritize our own personal success over those people. That's the first step I would give. And you start with one person at a time. What I always like to say is, like, the first one is always the hardest, and then you start getting really addicted to positive people that you don't even remember a life that negative people even exist. So that's the first piece I would say. The second piece around quitting my job that you had asked about, like the stress around it, how do you get over it? You have a stale paycheck and then you don't have anything anymore. My advice is always never burn the ships. We need to be very strategic about this, Karen, because most people statistically just aren't cut out to be their own ship. And the reason they're not cut out to be it is because entrepreneurship, being a business owner, being self-employed, requires a quality that most human beings have a trouble wrapping their heads around. And that quality is simply the ability and willingness to adapt to change. Most people just aren't willing to it, whether from its political standpoint, a religious standpoint, any standpoint. There's just a lot of people are very hard-headed with their ideas. And in business, you die if you have that mentality, because the world is changing every day. So my advice is don't do that. I would say have a security fund. Like, I had a 9-month emergency savings before I quit my corporate job. That's the first thing. The second thing I had was I had already replaced 40 to 50% of my income that I was making at IBM in my business. So I had side hustled it so much, and it took me 2.5 years, but it wasn't an overnight thing, where I had replaced half of it. So I knew if I could quit and go all in on it, and I get those 60, 70 hours back at IBM every week, I can make this work. And then the third piece, which is the most important one, is having a clear plan to replace all of the income. What are you going to do on day 1? What are you going to do on day 7? Have it super clear so that when the rocket launches, you're able to take off with the rocket and not sink.
I love that, because I remember when I was leaving corporate America, I had hung on for 2 years being totally miserable. And I was blogging for a number of companies, and I was doing some podcasting, but not to the point that I wanted to. And when my son depicted that I was depressed at my corporate job, I came home and I finally said to him and his dad, I can't stay there any longer. And my husband had a good job, but I was really the breadwinner. I was making really, really good money. And my son's college education was being paid for because of where I worked. So right away, I sat there thinking, I'm not going to have my paycheck. He's going to have to start paying for classes. Wow, that's a big loss. But when I realized I was losing myself, I knew that if I hung on any longer, I would really get sick. And what I really wanted to do would get infected in such a way I wouldn't be good at it anymore. So when I told both my husband and my son, I need to move on, they said, fine, we'll figure out a way to do it, which totally surprised me. I wasn't expecting that. And I'm sure there's a lot of listeners out there that probably are going through the same thing. How do I tell my significant other, I'm going to give up our income, which allows us to live a certain way and put money away and do all these things, and now we're not going to have it. But sometimes you have to voice those thoughts. And like you said, come up with a plan. If my husband had said to me, how can we do this for the next year so we can put all that money away for this year? I may have done that. In fact, I even brought it up, and he said, you're not at that point. You're at the point that you need to walk. And so we changed our lifestyle. And I'm not sorry at all. Okay. You know, my car now is 10 years old. The car that we had purchased for my son is 12 years old. They look practically brand new. They're still running. And I'm proud of it. I'd be actually more proud that we are driving two older cars that look so good on the road. And that's part of our success. But there are people out there that, like, I don't know how you got rid of that 95%. I still have them somewhere in the wings. And I think a lot of us do.
Absolutely, Karen. Well, thanks for sharing your story first of all. It's really powerful. You know what I would say is, look, it's not easy for sure. And I will say in my case, there's parts of my life that I was very lucky with. Like, for example, I live with my mom, my sister, and I just love them to death. They're amazing. Right. And that I couldn't have foreseen, right? That just happened. But what I would say is we can definitely choose our friends. So I would encourage us to start there. And I think the key is it all goes back to we get what we choose to tolerate in life. Right, always. So for the people that are lingering and the outer circles are kind of there, that you kind of keep in touch with every quarter, every month, every 2 months, but you know they're negative, just ask yourself the bigger question in life, which is picture yourself 50 years from now and they're still in your network and feel the pain of that decision. Was it worth the pain? And in some cases, it might be worth the pain. It might be. But in many cases, the answer is probably no. And I think the challenge with most of us as humans is we think about the short-term pain today. We don't think about the long-term pain tomorrow. So when we visualize that pain, well, crap, if I hang around John for 50 more years, yeah, sure, it doesn't bother me as much every month or two. What if that accumulates over 50 years? Is that worth it? And then if you start to feel that pain, you'll start to make your own decisions. And then the other piece is it goes back to priority, right? What do we actually want out of life? How badly do I want that happiness? Like, I really wanted to live a positive life. That's why I'm always in a good mood. I'm always happy. I really wanted that. And if that was the cost, I'd rather cut the leg off right away. It's going to pay it. Life is going to suck. But now I'm free for life. And that freedom, you can't put a penny on. You can't put money on.
I'm glad you said that, because that's sort of the message my father used to give us every morning. My father would get up in the morning, way before any of us ever had to get up, but you would hear him in the bathroom as he stood in front of the mirror, and he would yell, "Hello, handsome, it's a beautiful day." And we'd all wake up. It'd be like, "Oh, there he goes again." But
I like that guy.
it was wonderful, because, well, if he's going to have a beautiful day, I'm going to have a beautiful day. Now, on the opposite side of that, when my father would come home from work, if he wasn't smiling, for whatever reason, he may be tired, it may be hot, it may be cold, who knows? If I didn't see a smile on his face, I would start to cry. I always would assume it's me, because I saw him walking in. We connected eyes, and it must be my fault. And it took me years to get out of that. So I would start my day great. But when he would come home from work, if I didn't see him smiling, I could ruin it for the whole family. Because, oh, dad's in a bad mood. And he'd go, "No, I'm not." "Oh, yes, you are." And I'm crying, and nobody seems to know how to have a conversation. But years later, my dad and I sat down and we talked about it. He said, "I can't be smiling and laughing 24/7. And when he said that, it dawned on me, yeah, you're right. I'm just this little kid who sees you coming home with a, you were left with a smile on your face. You're coming home with a frown. You're looking at me, must be me." And I think a lot of us misinterpret other people as well. And especially in the workforce, that if somebody walks by our desk and doesn't say hello, oh, they don't like me anymore. or if, you have to help somebody more than they ever help you. But when I left corporate America, that's when I started changing my mindset. I'm not going to prejudge why you didn't say hello to me. I'm not going to assume that I'm doing more than you, because I'm doing what I can do and I'm doing what I'm comfortable with. Changes the positivity in our life.
I
So
love
how can our listeners find you? Let's say I have somebody in Australia who says, gosh, I love listening to Brenden. I wonder what kind of coach she'd be for me. So how can they find you and how could they hook up with you?
Absolutely, Carol. First of all, this is a great conversation. Thanks for sharing
Thank
your
you.
stories. That was super fun. So two easy ways to keep in touch. The first one is the YouTube channel. All you got to do is go to YouTube, type MasterTalk in one word. You'll have access to hundreds of free videos on how to speak. And the second way, for those who are interested in coaching, just sign up and register for one of my free trainings over Zoom on communication that I do every few weeks. And the website for that is rockstarcommunicator.com.
Well, we'll put this all in the show notes. And as I say after every show, you heard a lot here. Maybe you didn't hear exactly what you wanted, and that's okay. Reach out to Brenden, reach out to us here. If there's something else you'd like Brenden to share on this show, we'd be more than glad to have him back. You've given me, in this short time today, a better understanding of younger generations. I loved what you said about your sister, that she's very happy being a teacher. That's her passion. And we don't have to judge that. Teachers maybe make this and you might be making this. If we're following our passion in life, we're going to make it. We're going to find a way to make it. And it's because of individuals like yourself that I've learned that lesson. And the day that they put me 6 feet under, I'm not going to have regrets because I've learned to grow. And you've had a lot to do with that. Your YouTube channel is phenomenal. And I've been sharing it with a lot of people saying, just listen. I'm not telling you need to make a change, but just listen.
Karen, that means a lot to me. Thank you so much for doing that.
Wonderful. Well, you have a great day. We'll have you back again and enjoy the rest of the summer. Okay.
You too, Karen.
Take care. Bye-bye.